Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies and I'm joined today by Moges Zewdu Teshome. Moges is an Ethiopian PhD student at the Vienna School of International Studies. He holds an LLM in International Criminal Justice and Human Rights from Dundee University in the UK, and he's a member of the Ethiopian Young Lawyers Association and previously worked as a lecturer at Haramaya University College in Ethiopia. Moges wrote an article recently about the conflict in Ethiopia, and we've talked before, and I asked him to talk to us all today and explain what the war in Ethiopia against Tigray is all about, and he accepted. So thank you very much, Moges, for coming online today.
Pleasure is mine, Pascal. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, let's get started because you actually prepared a slide for us, right? I'll try to bring that up here because the conflict is quite confusing and you prepared an overview. Moges, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much once again. Yeah, we met before, and as you may know, it is very complicated. And it is a bumpy road to peace in Ethiopia. That's why I chose even the title and the most recent article, which is almost 12 pages long. I co-authored with 𝗂𝐇𝐀𝐏𝐿. I have to give the credit where he brought in the Western Balkans experience, and he's the president of the International Institute for Peace, where we both met last time. So that being said, it is very complex. It is multifaceted, and there are a lot of parties and actors into this conflict, both domestically, regionally, and internationally. The great power politics manifested itself, played out throughout the conflict, be it in the form of diplomatic pressures or some form of assistance, or maybe through mediation. So I will talk about that briefly. These slides are not meant to give you the depths, even those things I wrote in the article. Even the article itself could not capture everything. It is just basically on some major issues. So with this caveat, against this backdrop, let's move to the first issue, Pascal. Yeah, there we go. So what are the major structural causes of this civil war? It is a civil war to start with. It is not a very simple conflict, which claimed more than 600,000 lives, just lives, and civilian lives mostly. So it is just an approximation. Some people take it to 1 million people and above. If we consider all those people who are affected by the war directly, and if we include those people who are affected by the war indirectly, in the form of, for example, dislocation, forced removal, ethnic cleansing, lives and livelihoods, and it is more than 20 million. If we take the northern part of Ethiopia, we'll come to that. So the conflict affected directly at least 3 regions, which is Tigray, Amhara, and the Afar regions, and even beyond. We'll discuss that in a few minutes. So what are the major causes? One of the major causes, which is strikingly similar to the Western Balkans or generally the Balkans, is the ethno-linguistic political dispensations. That means Ethiopia is so unique. Ethiopia is unique in one way, politically speaking, that is having a political structure which is purely based on ethno-linguistic ethnic federalism. So you can find this breed only in Ethiopia. It used to be in the former Yugoslav Republic, as you may know, before its eventual downfall. And to some extent, if we can draw a parallel, we are in the early 1990s, where Yugoslav Republic was in back then. So it is a precipitation for a full-scale conflict. But somehow now we are able to silence the gun through the Pretoria Agreement, as we will discuss in the next slides. So one of the reasons is ethno-linguistic political configurations, which is a recipe for disaster, and it has been widely written on this. So that is the first issue. And then there is, of course, the political culture, which even precedes the 1994 Constitution, which brought in this ethnic-based federalism, which is a political culture of the zero-sum game, in a sense that there is no position or alternative multi-party system allowed in government structures, which means either you win or I lose, and that is still the game. And we have also a very pervasive culture of impunity and the cycle of violence, which is unfortunately still bedeviling the country. So that is a second issue. And then, as you may know, Pascal, following briefly the 2018 political reform or change, whatever it is, it used to be revolution, the hijacked revolution, I would rather say, there was a sense of transition, and that transitional period, which lasted almost for 3 years until 2021 election, which is actually one of the reasons which hastened the conflict with the TPLF, Tigray People's Liberation Front, which was ousted from power, is the postponement of the election for various reasons. So COVID-19 was the reason, but it wasn't COVID-19. It's all about the political game. So is it that this issue itself, as I said, could be the subject of one paper, full-fledged paper. So I'm just giving you the brief. So it was there. So the transition was flawed. It was hijacked by the ruling party, and all stakeholders were sidelined. And the justice system that we used, if there was any, is the victors' justice, where the victors engage in the witch hunting justice system. So the TPLF and some other echelons were hunted and haunted by this deeply flawed transition period. And then we also have these historical animosities and contestations or territorial disputes between the Amhara and the Tigray region, which is still not resolved by this peace agreement, which is going to be one of the sticking points, a recipe for future cycle of violence. And then the historical animosity between the TPLF or the Tigray people generally and Eritrea. That's why Eritrea directly involved in the conflict and, of course, committed atrocious crimes. So these 5 elements that we can see on the first slide are just the major structural causes of the conflict, not the only ones, Pascal.
And just to give our viewers an idea, I mean, the previous government was in power since 1993, right?
Since 1991.
1991. So continuously in power, and then first time they lose power in 2018, and then transition takes 2 years, and they transition goes somehow, but that's what we will talk about later, right?
Yeah, exactly. They have been in power for 27 solid years through repressive mechanisms. Then they lost power.
All right, then let's go to the next one.
So now we can move here. Already moved in. So let's start with the map of Ethiopia to show who are the actors. So I divided them into domestic actors, regional actors, and to some extent also great powers. Here is the region. If you follow, it's Tigray is right on the top. The border is bordering Eritrea. Eritrea is beside Tigray. Tigray is here, the yellow one on top. And then we have the Afar region in this color green or light green. Then there is Amhara here, dark one, right adjacent to Afar and Tigray or just next to Tigray. So these are the 3 regions which are based on ethnicity. When I say Afar, Amhara, and Tigray, they are ethnic groups. So the regions are drawn along the ethnic lines. That's one of the problems that I was talking about at the beginning, one of the structural causes. So it means there is ethnic homeland, which means that region mainly belongs to the Tigrayans, and Afar region belongs to the Afar people. The Amhara region, and unfortunately again, belongs to the Amhara ethnic group. So this gives somehow identitarian aspect to the conflict. It's not only about ideology. The conflict was about the power mainly between the TPLF, the ousted one, as we said, and the Prosperity Party, which is in power now, the incumbent regime. So it's political. Then it is identity because of the ethnic federalism and historical animosity itself. And then the third aspect is territory, because there is a disputed territory here between Tigray and Amhara region. It's called 𝗲𝗂𝐃𝐿 and Raya here. All these areas, buffer zones, are a contested area which were forcefully annexed by the TPLF when they come to power. And then there is another alternative narratives anyway. So there is competing narratives from both sides. So domestically speaking, when the TPLF attacked the federal army base in the northern part of Ethiopia within Tigray, and then the federal army responded accordingly, then the Amhara regional forces, which means the Amhara regional special forces and informal, what they call it, Fano, joined the war, the civil war, in repelling the Tigrayans from advancing. Then to that extent, it is clear, but the Eritrea directly involved in the war as well. When we talk about Eritrea sent troops into the hinterland of Ethiopia, into Tigray, then these are the major actors who directly involved in the war, which means they committed crimes. So if accountability comes, they all are responsible to a varying degrees. So that is domestic actors. Maybe if you have questions, I can clarify. Let's go to the regional, and then you will. Go ahead, please.
Question. So first of all, Eritrea is right above Tigray, right? So it's easy for them to basically geographically access Tigray. And the size of what we are seeing, like how big is Ethiopia, the whole country?
Maybe if I can give you an example of the country where I live currently, or Austria, it is around 13 times Austria almost. 13
times larger than Austria, yeah.
Yeah, or maybe around 10 times United or England. So it is a large country.
So we are talking about the size roughly of, I mean, even bigger than Germany, right?
Yeah, it is even almost 3 times bigger than Germany.
Yeah. Okay, so these are large distances also between the different regions. Okay, thank you.
Yes. So when I talk about historical animosity, there is also a border dispute between Eritrea and Ethiopia. It used to be Ethiopia, but that dispute, the 𝗲𝗂𝐃𝐿, I mean the 1998 war between Ethiopia and Eritrea, there was a frozen conflict, if you remember. So that frozen conflict is that it gave a chunk of land to Eritrea, which was never implemented according to the Algiers agreement, which brought the conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea to an end in 2002. So that also gives you the access point for the Eritreans, somehow recapturing what belongs to them, in quotation, and then entering the war by siding with the federal government. Because if we also connect the dot, the 2019 agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia was somehow exclusionary. It excluded Tigray and the Tigray people from participating in the peace process, which means they were actually somehow conspiring or preparing or paving the way to later on invade Tigray and the sandwich. So Amhara from this direction, Eritrea, and then the federal forces, which means Tigray will be sandwiched later on. That is what exactly happened. So I think that can give us why Eritrea involved into the war from the northern part.
Yes, and Tigray was the ethnicity that was in charge of Ethiopia and in power of Ethiopia for the last 27 years, or the longest part of it. And how many people in Tigray?
There are close to 6 million. That is the official data. Without counting, of course, those people who have been already affected, more than 1 million directly affected by the war, by this war. But we have to make one thing very clear. They are not the Tigrayan peoples entirely who were ruling Ethiopia for the last 27 years. They are elites or political group in the name of the Tigray people, quite few group, who, the oligarchs, I would say, or political oligarchs who were ruling Ethiopia, of course, in coalition with other ethnic groups, the Oromo, the Amhara playing the secondary roles, if I would like to say. So I just wanted to make that caveat.
Okay, thank you.
You can jump in if you wish.
No. So should I continue?
Yeah. So let's go. Yeah. No. To regional actors. So Eritrea is clear, direct intervention, but there are other actors as well. Egypt and Sudan. Sudan because of the border disputes, and Egypt because of the great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, as you may know, for the last 3-4 years, right before the outbreak of the war. So there is a proxy war. Somehow they wanted to use this war as a proxy, either through moral and military support, which they did actually. And then we have the suppliers, weapon suppliers, the UAE and the Turkey supply drones and other military equipment. So we have to keep that in mind. And China and the United States, China was somehow dormant, but the United States was actively involved in the war through diplomacy, sanctions, humanitarian assistance, and also through eventually mediation, which brought the conflict to an end through the Pretoria Agreement. So these are generally the regional and great powers directly involved. And I have to mention the EU, the role of EU, the European Union. The European Union's role was confined only to two things. One, diplomacy, and the second, actually the main one, is humanitarian intervention through the human security approach. So that they are always saying that accountability, justice, and priority for humanitarian aid, access to unfettered humanitarian aid and service. So with that, we can move to the third slide. Yeah, so we have to make it clear that the peace agreement is not about addressing the structural issues that we were talking about. It's not about that. Even Eritrea is not involved in the peace agreement. It was a peace agreement which was brokered mainly by under the aegis or auspices of the African Union, and then as bolstered by the United States, Pretoria being the host. And then the mediators, the major mediators are Olusegun Obasanjo, the High Representative for the African Union for the Horn of Africa, then the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, and then the vice president of South Africa. These three are the mediation team. Are they the only? No. United States had been actively helping them through various mechanisms. European Union had representatives, of course, and then some other countries like United Kingdom, and to some extent some other countries, Norway itself, and the ICRC also directly involved through observation and facilitation. So what is a peace agreement about? Mainly it is about this restoration of status quo ante. Which status quo ante? Only political status quo ante. Political status quo ante means the position, both parties, the prosperity parties, I mean the regime, the incumbent regime, and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, what we used to say TPLF, the ousted party, before the outbreak of the war, right? So this entails, in practical terms, restoration of constitutional order and resolving their difference through constitutional means. Then there should be also mutual recognition, okay, legitimacy, because there was that relationship was broken, and then regional election, which was held in Tigray in September 2020, are to be nullified, null and void. And then there should be political negotiation and establishment of interim government, regional government, and so on and so forth. These are the political status quo ante. To facilitate this, we also have incidental matters mentioned in the agreement. The main one being the DDR, so the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of the Tigray Defense Force. So originally it was a Tigray Regional Force, then it was changed into the Tigray Defense Force later on in the course of the war. So that is the main one, and then we also have the confidence building measures in different forms. For example, political dialogue, restoration of humanitarian aids and services, and somehow desisting from stopping hostile propaganda which they both engaged in, especially the diaspora community, which are not even happy with the peace agreement, by the way, that are one of the spoilers I will talk about. And then also both parties needed to hold some form of communication, which they have been doing. And the most recent one being, lastly, the most recent one being where the delegation from the federal government visited Mekelle. Mekelle is a regional capital of Tigray 4 weeks ago. So these are just brief things that our listeners or audiences need to expect from us. Otherwise, the peace agreement is not resolving any underlying issues, which we will discuss in the next slides. Yeah, what are the sticking issues? We will come back to the Western Balkans. So when I talk about the sticking issues, they mean those issues which have not been addressed by the peace agreement. So the peace agreements do not wish to address the major structural causes, as well as it did not include stakeholders and spoilers. Stakeholders being Eritrea, and the spoilers being stakeholders plus and or spoilers being the Amhara, Afar, and other, those who are directly affected by the conflict. The other issue, and which is a broader issue, is actually lack of a comprehensive peace plan. We do not have a comprehensive peace plan which is integrated with the dispensation of justice, holding a national dialogue, which we established a national dialogue commission, which is somehow ineffective or crippled for more than a year now. So even they could not integrate these two processes, the national dialogue process and the peace plan. So the peace plan itself is not including the war on the western and southern part of Ethiopia. We still have a civil war where the Oromo Liberation Army is fighting on the western part of Ethiopia. Actually, around 1/3 of the Oromia region is out of the control of the federal government because there is a civil war there. Nobody's talking about that. So we don't have a comprehensive peace plan as well. That's why I said around the conclusion of my paper, a flawed peace plan is a postponed crisis or conflict, basically. So that is the second issue. Justice, the issue of justice or accountability. Remember, I said we have a pervasive culture of impunity, Pascal. So we are not addressing the issue of cycle of violence and the culture of impunity through accountability mechanisms. If there is anything, they just only mentioned the issue of transitional justice in one sub-article among the 13 substantive provisions of the peace agreement. And that tells you, and the progress so far, is that the parties, even the mediators, were pretty much occupied by peace at any cost, even peace narrowly defined, silencing the gun at any cost. I don't think that's going to bring lasting peace for Ethiopia. And then as we discuss the issue of contested areas, it says contested issues. It doesn't say the contested areas shall be resolved according to the constitutional order. The point is, the issues could not be resolved according to the constitutional orders. So you cannot really resolve the issue which was created by the constitution itself. We needed a political discussion, extra constitutional and legal means combined together to resolve that. So that is not addressed by the peace agreement, which is still a boiling point between Tigray, and it is just a stalemate between Tigray and Amhara region. And what there is no public participation. I had a diagram in the original article where the vast majority of the community, of course, the diaspora digital community, actually to be precise, 62% said the peace process is flawed. Okay, that gives you something. It is not quite indicative, but at least it shows that there is a perception where some part of the society feels that the peace process is not inclusive, it is not comprehensive, and then it is flawed. So our audiences can read from that article. Maybe we can share later on for them to read. Then I come up with this concept of 3 R's myself. Following a peace process, we must focus on these 3 R's, which is to mean reintegration, reconstruction, and reconciliation in order of importance. These are essential, and nobody is talking about these 3 R's. We were talking about the DDR, but we are not talking about the 3 R's, which are also important. Reintegration is important. Then after reintegration, we have to reconstruct. And after reconstruction, there should be broader reconciliation. So These are among the sticking issues, Pascal. You can add more. I would suggest our readers to go and read the article for broader issues.
Yes, we will put the
You wanted
article
to
also
interject.
down in the description. And let me just ask one more thing: was the idea of the Tigray Liberation Army and also of the Omara, I think you said, that are currently also fighting in the
The
west,
Amhara.
is Omhara, is the idea of them to separate from Ethiopia, or is the idea to capture the capital Addis Ababa and then rule from there the rest? Like, what was their goal?
So the Amaras have nothing of that sort at all. Even to some extent, they are now part of the ruling party. What they are demanding is not to secede. Actually, if there is any ethnic group in the Ethiopian history and even now that has never asked for secession, is the Amhara people. So they are not asking that. What they are asking is two issues. One, those contested areas belong to us. That's what they said. The contested area, I said, on the western part of Tigray, between Tigray and Amhara, which is historical. It can go back to 70, 60 years. That's one, what they are demanding. Second, they wanted to be represented in the peace process because they were active participants in the conflict, as I suggested, from every angle. They participated, they fought alongside the federal government, and they are excluded from the peace process. And they also feel that the current political dispensation is not um, uh, taking their concerns, political agency, very seriously. These are the only issues they are raising as far as my knowledge goes.
And the Tigray people, did they want to secede? No, right? They wanted to recapture
They do, they do.
regain power. They do. Okay.
It is just like and or. So if they can, they want to rule Ethiopia like they used to do. I mean, when I say Tigray people, okay, let's say the TPLF, okay, the ruling party, the Tigray People Liberation Front, they wanted to restore the previous status quo where they used to be active political participants to rule. So as long as they rule, the issue of secession is not there. And when we talk about secession, by the way, I would like, because not everybody is well versed with Ethiopian politics and constitution, Article 39 of the Ethiopian Constitution provides for unconditional secession. It is just saying that in a marriage, let's say, let's take this analogy, in a marriage, you go out for a coffee and you will never come back, and you don't even have an obligation to let your partner that you are not coming back. What kind of marriage is it? Just tell me. I mean,
Really? So
that's absurd, right? That is
there's
what the Constitution says.
wait. So there's an article, and let me change this for a second. There's an article in the Ethiopian Constitution that says any part of Ethiopia can leave at any time they want.
Without any condition, at any time. It is called no-cause divorce in legal terms. The no-cause divorce. You don't need to say you cause. You don't even say that I'm not happy with Ethiopia to divorce, to trigger the divorce procedure.
Who has the authority to declare that? Do the different states have state capitals and that would be able to do this?
No, it is only the matter of the respective nations or nationalities which are provided in Article 39 itself of the Constitution, which have exclusive rights to self-determination. So the issue of who is the self thing is always a problem, right? When we talk about self-determination, people tend to forget who is self, right? That is what caused most of the crisis even in the European history. So self has never been defined. It says nations, nationalities. That famous communist manifesto of nations, nationalities, and peoples. So who can decide? Not the federal government, not other regions, not other peoples, not even, let's say, now we are close to 120 million, right? And the Tigray people constitute only 66 million, like around 5% of the population, which means that 95% of the population of the country has no business in the secession of Tigray, for example. I'm just giving you an example. That's why I say this is absurd. I have never seen such kind of formula in any other political arrangement.
I have one. The European Union. any member state can leave at any time as long as it keeps to its own constitutional requirements.
Well, that is not even a political arrangement, so to say. They are still nation states. Analogy is there, but it's very weak. So they are nation states constituting the European Union, supranational institution. So what binds the members of the European Union is not nationality or nationhood as such. It is institutions, right? What we call constitutional patriotism, if we use the Haas concept, right? That German philosopher, constitutional
Right, so
patriotism.
did the Tigray people or the party, the Tigray People Party, or was I'm sorry, I forgot what they're called. Like, did they invoke that
TPLF
article?
for short. TPLF.
TPLF. Did they invoke the article?
Yeah, they did originally. I mean, around in the course of the war, especially the diaspora member and some opposition parties and the civil society representing the Tigray people, they invoked the right to self-determination. But for that, there are two requirements. The war has to stop. You cannot. There is no self-determination when everyone is fighting with you. There should be a political community and a stable ground. That's one thing. And then there is also the issue of contested territory, right? I told you, how can you secede without fulfilling those, taking back the so-called occupied region, western part of Tigray. So nobody is willing to give that part back to Tigray because it is a contested area. And without that contested area, the Tigray region is not resourceful, one of the deprived region in Ethiopia, unfortunately, in terms of natural resource. I'm not referring to human resource, I'm referring to natural resource. So the Tigray statehood is untenable, I would argue. It is untenable in terms of security, it is untenable in terms of economy, it is untenable in terms of future relationship, it is untenable in terms of international relations. So that is my argument. By all standards, it is untenable, but they have the right to self-determination because it is a no-cause divorce, as I already mentioned. What is going to happen? It is frozen for now. No one is talking about self-determination because silencing the gun first, humanitarian assistance and reintegration of those dislocated, and then maybe in the near future, referendum might be held or might not be held depending on their representation in the federal government.
Okay, thank you for that. So, you then in the article you compare the situation in Ethiopia, which is very complex and political ethnic based, with the situation in the Balkans, which was and still is also such a complicated conflict because you have all of these overlapping territories and peoples living together that not always agree with that being in the same state, especially like something like Bosnia. Can we maybe bring that back and then you tell us what you mean with that comparison?
Yes. It is very complicated, and as I said, the co-author is Dr. Hannes, and you might say a lot on that, but these are the things I extracted broadly from the Western Balkans, which could be a parallel with the situation in Ethiopia. So what lessons basically can we draw from the Western Balkans? When I say Balkans, specifically the Western Balkans, that is how we used in the paper. First, the conflict is identity-driven conflict, right? And this identity-driven conflict, according to conflict management theories, various conflict theories, they tend to be salient, okay? They are sacrosanct, and they are protracted. You cannot resolve the identity conflict like you see the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has been there for years. It's not just because it is a military conflict, because it is identity-driven conflict. You cannot usually negotiate on identity. Varies. It could be religious, it could be ethnic, it could be somehow ideological, or both. So this is one of the parallels that we can draw, and it is a multi-party conflict. Okay, multiple issues in terms of issues, and a multi-party in terms of the involvement of parties, both regional and domestic. And this requires, of course, multi-track diplomacy, right? Not by excluding, let's say, Eritrea or Amhara or some group from the peace process. It is flawed if you are not engaging Even for that matter, as I said, the Oromo people, Liberation Front, which are fighting in the western part of Ethiopia. Not necessarily in this Pretoria peace agreement, to be clear, but generally within the Ethiopian peace plan. That's what I'm referring to. Because we are talking about the peace building, right? So, and this peace process has no clear and effective guarantor, which is essential in any peace process, especially the Western Balkans. There's the European Union and NATO, if you remember, as you recall. In the Ethiopian case, it is the African Union and a panel of experts, but panel of experts, they don't have any military, they don't have such enforcement mechanisms. What will happen if someone broke the peace process? Nothing is there. Not even the US or other great powers included the exit clause in that to trigger some effective measures. So that is one of the something which is lacking. And also I usually focus on the local turn in peace building. This is a theoretical framework, as you know. It's a local turn, not the top down imposition of peace through mediation, negotiation, or coercive diplomacy, right? You need to talk to the local people or those people who are affected by the conflict, at least during the phase of implementation, at least at the very minimum. And then no one is being consulted, no extensive discussion is being held currently, and I don't see that is going to happen in the near future. So that's very important. And if we see the Western Balkans, then the discussion, as you know, and the local approach is still ongoing. It has taken more than a couple of decades, but that is the approach. Because you remember the Dayton peace agreement, one of the problem is somehow it is a top-down. Now they are going away from that and then turning to the local turn itself. So that's the issue I'm trying to address. And of course, I have already mentioned at the beginning, the structural problems. Those multifaceted and complicated structural problems are not addressed, and they are trying to address in the Western Balkans over the years. But in the Ethiopian case, the Pretoria peace agreement is not addressing those issues. It is not even about those issues, as I said. It is a temporary pill or medicine, if we can use that term. Then the bigger, the big elephant in the room, which is the peace versus justice dilemma, right? It is a big dilemma throughout many conflict resolutions in Africa, Latin America, and some other parts, even in the Western Balkans. You know what happened with the ICTY, or the International Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, the ICTY tribunal. The perception of the people, one party always considers the decisions and the process of justice as if it is lopsided, as if it is a witch hunting. Even to this day, even truth itself is very subjective. Everyone has his own story and his own truth. So without even going to the truth and the justice, the peace agreement has not somehow stricken a delicate balance between justice and a peace. And I would recommend, which the government somehow is trying to do, is a robust transitional justice mechanism. That's very important. And we don't have a long-term commitment from stakeholders. As we can see, expediency is overtaking everything. But for the peace process to be sustainable, to bring about lasting peace, we need a firm political commitment, not only from domestic stakeholders, but all stakeholders, including the mediators and the guarantors, if there are any, including the European Union. And this has to be coupled, of course, with mechanisms of preventing a conflict, the future conflicts, right? Because there are recipes for future conflict between Amhara and Tigray in the Oromia region. Now there are polarization between the Oromo and the Amhara. I mean, throughout the countries, big country and populous countries, there are tensions everywhere. That's why I'm saying that it's not enough to silence the gun somewhere or silence the smoke somewhere while the fire is still ravaging the other part of the country. So we need to stop the future conflicts through preventive diplomacy. These are just some major issues I was trying to compare between Ethiopia and the Western Balkans. But for the rest, our audiences can read from the paper itself. So that said, now the floor is open for some general questions if you have some outstanding questions, Pascal.
Oh, I do. So, Ethiopia isn't sometimes in the news when something very tragic happens, otherwise it is not. And I wasn't even aware of the hundreds of thousands of people who were actually reportedly killed already through the 2 years of conflict. When we look at it in a longer scale, was Ethiopia peaceful before, let's say, 2020, or were there other conflicts that were going on that were just not, that we in Europe are just not looking at?
Well, it depends on our perspective, as I said. If we see the issue from structural point of view, the long term, the boiling conflict, or what we may say is a volatile, like volcano. The issue has been volatile. So the TPLF, to their credit, has been able, I'm saying the TPLF dominated EPRDF government, Ethiopian People Revolutionary Democratic Front, the coalition of parties, ruling Ethiopia for 27 years, TPLF being the dominant. So they were repressive. They have no parallel in terms of human rights abuses and repression. But at the same time, they had been able to keep the negative peace, okay? The negative peace through incarceration, through closing all political spaces. Actually, one of the reasons which, of course, brought their regime to an end. Ethiopia used to be a net security exporter in the region before the 2020. So that much is clear. Yes, negative peace to a large extent was there. But if we understand the peace in terms of a larger peace, greater freedom, we never had a peaceful movement. Okay, so there was no proper election. There was no political space and political parties free elections, apart from a temporary 2005 election, which was hijacked. And then the issue of identity itself was not properly handled, because what keeps the country together, the common traits which united the country, has been dismantled, or everyone focusing on their own respective region or ethnicity. So all I'm saying is that, yes, there was negative peace, but if we define peace in terms of a structural causes of the conflict and in terms of its comprehensive elements, we never had a peace as such, Pascal.
And when we go even further back, during the Cold War, Ethiopia for a long time was under a communist government, and before that, Ethiopia is or Abyssinia was very exceptional in the sense that Abyssinia was one of one of the only two African states part of the League of Nations before the United Nations. So Ethiopia is an example for a nation state that was at least accepted in the as part of an equal in the West, until then, of course, the horrible invasion of Italy of Ethiopia that reshuffled the entire politics, I suppose, of Ethiopia again. Could you say something about that long view, the 100 years view of the development of Ethiopia?
Yeah, it is very complex, as you said. We might suggest some books, and our readers can read some historical books or political history or the political economy of Ethiopia, for that matter. But for now, I can just briefly give you what that long process has got to do with the conflict or our present predicament. Okay. Yes, Ethiopia has never been a nation state. It has always been a multicultural country with more than 80 ethnic groups. Okay. So the nation building process throughout this history was incomplete, and even today it is incomplete. Okay, be it in terms of religion, religious representation, or because it used to be a Christian kingdom, right? Until the 1974, there was a state religion, Orthodox Christianity being the state religion. And then that issue resolved. The issue of feudalism was resolved following the 1974 revolution. Okay, so those were fundamental turning points. And the issue of somehow language, using local language, were partially resolved following the 1974 famous Ethiopian revolution, which was hijacked, by the way. We might have a discussion about the tales of two revolutions. I'm writing a paper on that, where exactly in the same manner, the 2018 and 1974 revolution, being 45 years apart from each other, hijacked by the elites in the same process. So that's another issue which we may discuss privately or some other time. But for now, this culture I was talking about, the political culture, if you remember, is an upshot of all those failed revolutions and disappointments, okay? Deep disappointments and broken promises in terms of peace. So the peace promises have been broken time and again. Then 1991, the TPLF-led government came to power and dominating Ethiopia, and they brought in something alien to Ethiopia, the ethnic-based identity, which never defines Ethiopian people. Yes, we have always been multicultural, but there has never been nations, independent nations within the Ethiopian empire. No, there are ethnicities, yes, and cultural communities, but what they misunderstood or deliberately implanted a time bomb is through ethnic nationalism. So when ethnic nationalism is overheated, as a political scientist, you know, then the civic nationalism, what binds the people, always go to the background. That's what happened. So there is no common language. When I say language, it's not a language per se, common philosophy, okay? Common attachment to the country, apart from those power struggles, national or citizenship, and being part of Ethiopia. So throughout the last 50 years, starting from the League of Nations all the way today, as we speak, there is a problem of nation building, one. There is a political culture which has never been resolved. And there is also the issue of human rights abuses, okay, human rights abuses, which is a serious violation of human rights. And the flip side of it being lack of accountability, right? If there is always a pervasive culture of impunity, and then there is no accountability, and then without justice, there is no lasting peace, Pascal. So this is how I can connect the broader issues, but we can write a book about it, not even one book, but dozens of books on this issue. So that's why I have to keep it brief for you for now.
Yes, thank you for that. The thing that's going through my mind is also this, and you talked about it a little bit, the point of external actors. So I had a talk with Nikolai Petro about Ukraine, and he was saying that without the local Ukrainian the political problems within Ukraine, there would be no war among new Cold War between Russia and the United States. You know, but you do have the interactions between the local parties and the external parties, and they back different sides. So how important would you say is this question of like external actors intervening in the local processes of Ethiopia and internal disagreements actually fueling the conflict?
Yeah, that's a great question, Pascal. No two conflicts are exactly similar, as they say. Even taking the case of Ukraine now, I also wrote, I'm here and there, I also wrote a peace blog on the Ukrainian conflict, actually, which is entitled A New Cold War in the Making, okay? The Russian invasion of Ukraine, that's the title. Yes, the conflict in Ukraine is in Ukraine, about the people of Ukraine, mostly, but it is not entirely about Ukraine. That's my argument. There is a scenario of a Cold War in a different form. There is something bigger at play. There is economic war, there is ideological war, and there are other issues as well. So much about the Ukrainian issues because I'm not an expert on that. But when it comes to the Ethiopian case, there are definitely external actors, but for the external actors to involve in the wars, there is a conducive environment. That conducive environment being internal division, tensions, and a zero-sum political game where as long as I'm not getting what I need from Ethiopia, then goodbye Ethiopia, and then I can work with any enemy. That is one reason. So that paves the way for an intervention. Of course, the great power politics returned to the Horn of Africa. So think of as a region, Horn of Africa. One of the particular feature of the politics of Horn of Africa, for your information, maybe further reading and research, is that when we talk about security, we only refer to regime security in the Horn of Africa. The regime security, the security of the regime. So one way of destabilizing the other country is by waging proxy war to destabilize the security of the regime. So the Eritrean regime destabilizing the Ethiopian regime destabilizing the Somali region, the Somali in Uganda, and then one into the Sudan, destabilizing the Ethiopian regime, no country, regime. So regime security is a common trait that you can draw along all the politics of the Horn of Africa, be it 50 years or 5 years. So that is repeating itself. So Isaias wants us to weaken Ethiopia, of course, ultimately. Then Sudan and Egypt, they want a weaker Ethiopia so that they can stop the progress of the, at least the dam, the issue of Blue Nile River, the water utilization. Actually, my master's thesis is on the water conflict between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. So maybe it will be published soon. It will be published soon on the journal. I will send it to you, a redacted version.
Because Ethiopia is the upstream country, and Egypt is downstream. So the dam in Ethiopia is a huge water problem for these two large players in Africa.
That's true. That's true. We can say also Egypt is a hydro-hegemon, okay? Hydro-hegemony. It has established hydro-hegemony for such a long time. So somehow the upstream country, Ethiopia being, of course, the harbinger, is now questioning that established hegemony, okay? That is one of the source of the conflict, if we put it in a political term. Yes.
Okay. Maybe a last question. So the current peace agreement you laid out is flawed. It's anything but perfect. But do you judge it can it be improved? Is it the best we've got? Can it last? Or do you foresee, are the seeds for the next war already planted in this one?
To be honest, I do not like to be or seem to be very pessimist. As much as the peace agreement brought the conflict to an end, or at least silencing the gun, it was perfect. So thanks to the coercive diplomacy or creative diplomacy, which I mentioned in the paper, and other issues. Thanks to the African Union to wake up at least lately to broker the peace, and all the international community to put pressure so that the parties can talk or at least stop the war, right? That is a priority. Human security first. That is good. And some of the confidence building measures which are put into place are also good and hopeful. And so far, if we just stick to the peace agreement, they are implementing it in a right way, mostly. But the imperfection can be rectified not by signing another agreement, that is too late, but by engaging the spoilers as well as the stakeholders for its implementation, one. So to salvage it, in other words, we can still salvage the peace agreement in its totality if we engage all the stakeholders, and if we also apply the preventive conflict management strategy so that the future conflict between these hotspot areas, okay, between Tigray and Eritrea again, and Amara and Tigray due to contested land, and Amara and Oromo because of political issues. So preventive strategies are necessary. So international community must keep an eye on that. And then the third issue is, of course, the issue of accountability. To give priority to accountability and bring about justice. At least there should be symbolic prosecution, and there should be a comprehensive justice process and resolving structural issues step by step. One of that mechanism being the reinvigorating the national dialogue process. It has to be reinvented again. That process is already crippled. So with this, I think, and some political commitment from the conflicting parties themselves, there is hope that we may not end up or relapsing into the conflict or the conflict itself, or starting a new one. I'm hopeful with this, what we call a suspicious mind, or some form of pragmatic optimism, which I have in mind, Pascal. Let's hope for the best.
I mean, that's a hopeful way to end 1 hour discussion. Moges, thank you very much for explaining, for your presentation, and also for sharing the an optimistic outlook. I hope so too, of course, that the peace process, which is a long one and which always takes generations, but that it gets ahead, and that there will be a lasting silence of the guns.
Yeah, thank you very much. It is always my pleasure to talk to you, and we'll have a discussion either informally or in one way or another in the future. Let me say the final word. If there is anything very important for us, for Ethiopians, and for the international community, is if we can try to learn from history. For that, Ethiopia has a textbook example, actually a repertoire of history to learn from, especially the recent ones. So let's try to learn from history, not to repeat it.
Yes, and we will record and we will talk about it. I will reach out again to you to talk in the future. So thank you very much, Moges, and have a wonderful evening.